this, that when we are going out with the gospel, we want to remember that we are representing the Lord, and that even though they may disagree with us, they have the right to disagree. They have the right to a judgment that's different than ours. And there is no authority in Scripture for coercion or the Islam or the sword approach, which is violence. There's none of that. It's just moral persuasion. That is, we by our life are teaching the gospel, showing that we believe sincerely what we're asking another to believe, and it is reasonable. Isaiah 1:18 says, "Come now, let us reason together." Christianity is reasonable. Romans 12:1 talks about which is your reasonable service. Reasonable. That's logikos there. We get our word logic from it. It's logical that Jesus died for me, so I should be willing to die for Him. Or in the words of Romans 12:1, to live for Him. You know, in the Old Testament, they had animal sacrifices. That animal died in worship to God. In the New Testament, we don't have animal sacrifices, but we still have sacrifices, and they're human sacrifices, but not to the death. I beseech you, therefore, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice. So what's more valuable to God? Me to give my life in one fell swoop, or for me to live for 50 years as a servant of my God? For me to be a tool in His box that He can plug into a situation, a voice that He can use, a life or hands that He can use to serve. Yes, we see the wisdom in that. So now let's talk about the four principles. The first one is cast a wide net. And that is based on Matthew 4:18 and 19, where these fishers of men were told that they were to go out fishing. And what the application of this is that, well, let me start with the application and then I'll work back up to it. So think about the congregation where you're a member. Does the membership inside the building reflect the demographics around the building? Do you see what I'm saying? You see what I'm asking? In other words, is everything that is out there demographically represented in here? Now, let me talk about that a little bit. The gospel, we'll talk about four areas to cast the wide net in a minute. But let me go ahead and sort of put us on the page of where we're going with it. The gospel does not break along any social, racial, ethnicity, or economic lines. That is, the gospel goes along the lines of good hearts. Luke 8:15. The word of God, when sown into an honest and good heart, bears fruit. So there's nothing external that you can look and say that person will become a Christian, this person won't. It's determined by them. We self-sort. In other words, we receive the gospel, we decide whether we obey it or not. If we do, then we sort into the saved, we obey the gospel. If not, we sort out of the saved and we go back to the world. But we make that choice. No one can look at me and say, he's not a candidate for salvation. Or look at her and say, she's going to become a Christian. We don't know that because it doesn't break along any lines that are external. It's always internal. So as a congregation, as we carry the gospel into our community, if we're carrying the gospel to every creature, which is what the Scripture says, then that will eventually be reflected in the membership in the congregation. Because the gospel is going to reach some in every demographic if they have access to it. That's just the way it's set up. So let's talk about casting a wide net, these four areas. Number one is ethnicity. What about the genetics, the biology, the ancestry? You know, all of us came out of Adam, so in that sense we're all related. Adam and Eve had children who had children who had children. Eventually, we all came out of that first marriage. But it narrowed again at the time of the flood because only Noah, Mrs. Noah, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, and their wives lived through the flood, so the human race started over there, and Mr. and Miss Noah had already had their kids, but the 3 children had their grandkids, right? And we all are grandkids of Noah, somewhere along the way. Now, so all of us, as we mentioned in a different lesson, are either a descendant of Ham, Shem, or Japheth. And all of those are loved by God equally. God is a colorblind Father. He doesn't have any preference for one person, one race of people, one ethnicity. He just loves His children. He loves everybody and His potential children. So as a church, we want to make sure that we, I'll just illustrate this. This hurts me even to say this, but I think it'll be helpful to say it. I was preaching in Texas. It was a small church, maybe 30 members. They had a building full every night, but it was a small building, but they had a lot of visitors. But anyway, the preacher's been there for a while, and he was a very evangelistic guy. He lived in a community, a retirement kind of, a golf course community. It was a little older, but it was still very nice, and there was like 200 and something homes in there. And I think he knew everybody in that place because he had been around, you know, and he would take me around. Well, these people, they've been visited with us before, or I talked to them and they're such and such religion. I'm going to get back to, you know, he just knew everybody. But he said, I want you to go make a visit with me. And I said, okay. So we went over and made a visit to this lady who had visited their services before. We were trying to get her to come to the meeting, and she did come. She came 2 months. But he told me this story on the way over there. Now, this congregation, as I remember, was predominantly Caucasian. There may have been Hispanic, may have been black members there. I don't remember. Or other. I don't think there were any other ethnicities. But this lady was not Caucasian. So we pull up in her driveway after he just told me this story. He said, we sent out house to house into this community, and she responded. And she said, I've been reading this, and I like what it says, and I'm thinking about visiting Sunday. But I have a question. Do you let black people come to your church? That hurts me even to say, even to think about. But I say it because the world we live in doesn't always understand the love of Christ. And it hasn't always been reflected among those who claim to be the followers of Christ, to be fair, right? She was the sweetest lady. She had, and of course, he assured her, and she came, and everybody loved her. And she'd been several times before that meeting, but she came. She had cancer, and she was taking treatment, so she wasn't able to come. Last time I asked him, she had still not obeyed the gospel. They were still in contact with her, but haven't thought to ask him in a while. I hope she's our sister by now. But what I want us to see is that our community needs to know everybody is welcome to hear the gospel. And we are open to, the more diverse a church is, the better off it is. You have somebody walk in off the street of whatever background, and they come in. If they don't see anybody that looks like them, it's going to be awkward, right? You and I are the same way. Whoever is the same way. You say, well, am I welcome here? Or am I going to fit in here? Or is everybody okay with this? Yeah. So we want to carry the gospel out into our community along all ethnic lines. You can put in your notes here, Revelation. I mentioned this, I think, in another lesson, but sometimes I don't remember where. So Revelation 5:9 and Revelation 7:9 talks about souls that have already gone over to the other side. You know, they're saved. Those that have been redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. And it says of every people, nation, people, tongue, kindred, and PTKN. I remembered it by the first letter. P, people, K, kindred, PTK. Kindred and language. Anyway, you divide up humanity. You know, if you want to forget something and not be able to remember it, get confused in front of an audience. Oh, yeah. You can easily figure it out on the pew. And another thing don't ever do in front of people is try to do math. You just can't do math in front of people. I can't, you know. I always ask somebody. I'll say, if I got a math problem, I'll just ask, you know. And you can think of it when you're sitting down. There's something about being in front of people. But anyway, what that shows is that people are being saved out of every people, kindred, tongue, nation, political group, linguistic group, biological group, social group. It really doesn't matter. The gospel can, and you can look at any congregation of any size and see this. The group of people that assembles on a Sunday in this location is diverse and would not be together at the same in a same setting under any other circumstances, because it's the gospel that brings us together. And we may be, you know, you got rich people, poor people, you got every kind of person, but the one thing that brings us all together is that, the Lord's table. Because we are all children of the same God. And we all value our souls. And it doesn't matter what your externals are, your soul is the same. Made in the image of God, more valuable than all the world. So it's the same. Okay, so the first was along ethnicity. That's a tough word for an Alabama guy to say. The next one is economic lines. Economic lines. Mark 13:37 says, the common people heard Jesus gladly. Did you know Jesus was born into a poor family? You say, how do you know that? You remember when they went to offer the sacrifice for the firstborn son, which was required in the law of Moses? You're supposed to offer a lamb. You know what Mary and Joseph offered? Birds, pigeons, turtle doves. Why? That was the poor people's offering. And if you didn't have enough to give the lamb, you could substitute the pigeons. And they substituted. That tells us that Jesus was born into a poor family. Now, he was the firstborn son, but he had, 4 brothers and at least 2 sisters. So it was a big family, and the dad was a carpenter, right? So I don't know how well they managed money all the way through, but when he was born, they were poor. And that's the kind of family that Jesus grew up in. So Jesus related to poor people, and the poor people related well to him. And in the church, not many mighty, not many noble are called, 1 Corinthians 1:26. That doesn't mean they're not invited. It just means they don't hear. I used to door knock more than I do now, but we used to go out with, like the school of preaching would go out several times while you're in school, and then we would do door knocking in Jacksonville, different. But I could tell you, we had a mission work in Georgia. We'd go door knock in the summers. I could tell you just about what kind of success we were going to have when we first got out of the car. If they were big houses, it's going to be a tough day. They're either not going to be home or they're not going to be interested. If it was a dirt road, some trailers and small, old, rundown kind of houses, we're going to have a good day. You know why? Common people hear him gladly still. The rich people, they got to pay for that big house. And maybe they don't feel like they really need God so much because they got everything, right? When do you feel like you need God more? When things are going great, you got plenty of money to pay all the bills, or when, I don't know what we're going to do this month. Yeah, we do a little more praying, or maybe a lot more praying, under the second kind of circumstances than the first. Deuteronomy 8:10-20, when the children of Israel were about to go into the land of Canaan, Moses warned them, God warned through Moses, when you get into the land of Canaan and you've eaten to your fill, you are eating from vineyards you didn't plant, and you're drinking from wells you didn't dig, you're living in cities you didn't build, don't forget me. Guess what they did? They forgot him. As soon as, everybody, this is one time in history of a nation, when everybody was rich. Everybody was rich. You say, how you know that, preacher? In Joshua, when they went in and they conquered the land and then they divided it up, everybody was rich because everybody got a plot of land. Everybody. Of course, soon some people ended up squandering theirs, and somebody else owned it before long. But at that period in history, everybody was rich. Well, the Lord warned them, and then they forgot. One of the major themes of the book of Deuteronomy is forget not. And we live in a land, I know times are not as easy as they have been maybe in some of our lifetimes. But I don't answer this question, but I'm going to ask it. Do you have any food in your house at home when you get home? If you didn't wear the clothes you got on right now, could you have picked other clothes to wear today? Or is anybody in here worried? Don't answer. But is anybody in here worried about having enough gas to get back home tonight? Well, no, I got a credit card, right? Yeah, we're rich. Anybody doesn't have a house to go to? You're going to sleep under a bridge or in a tent tonight. I mean, we sleep in tents sometimes because we want to, but not because we have to. Right? And I don't sleep on the ground anymore. I mean, I might if I needed to, but I like sleeping in a bed, you know. Do you see the point, though? You know, we're very rich. But some of that is based on perception. Even though I might be rich, I'm not as rich as other people, right? And even in a rich society, there are those who have been cast aside. A lot of times due to poor health, sometimes poor decisions, a lot of times alcohol or drug use decisions. Sometimes because of a lack of training or ability to learn and to get a job that would be more than just a living wage. And none of that matters to the church, except that we cannot say we only want members that can contribute something. Oh, I'd really love to have that doctor as a member here. He could really add a lot to our congregation. And we might mean he could add a lot to the contribution. Well, I want the doctor to be a member here. But I also want the unemployed guy. And really, if one came down this aisle on the same Sunday and another one came down this aisle, which one would God be gladder that he came? It's equal, isn't it? You see, that's God's attitude. So economically, the gospel needs to go to all. Number 3, demographically, the gospel needs to go to all. What this means is gender, male, female. And there are only 2 genders, by the way. Genesis 1, 26, 27, male and female made he them. Those are the genders. What about age? What's the oldest person don't answer this, but what's the oldest person that this church has baptized? I remember an 80-year-old man walking down the aisle one time. That's rare, but what a joyful day it was. And then you have those many who obey the gospel in their youth. Male, female, young, old. Demographically, you want every blue collar, white collar, college educated, not educated. The more diverse a church is, the better off it is, because all those are tools that can be used toward the spread of the gospel and toward the worship of God with the talents that are brought to the table from those different segments of society. And the last one is culturally, number 4, culturally. And what I mean by this is there are some cultures that are overlooked or are rejected because of sin. I think I'll hold that thought and come back to it in a minute. But let me go back to our original list. The 4, we've talked about cast a wide net. So we need to cast out a net that includes all that are in our community and that we can reach with the gospel. There are no external disqualifiers for the gospel. Number 2 on our 4 principles. Put on the servant's towel. Put on the servant's towel. What I'm seeing in churches, and you've probably seen this too, especially if you've traveled much, but I'm seeing is that churches that are growing are churches that are serving. They're not the churches that put on their sign, all are welcome. Well, we should put that on our sign. We open the door every Sunday. Those aren't the churches that grow. Churches that grow are the ones that go out of the building, into the community, and start helping people. You know, John 13, 1 through 13, Jesus taught the lesson when he washed the disciples' feet. You know, they were like, I don't know why, but I see them sitting in a row in my mind, like all 12 of them here. And they're like, I'm not going to wash your feet. You wash my feet. I'm not going to wash your feet. You know, they're like, not me. Maybe him, but not. Jesus comes in, puts a towel on, takes a basin of water, and he starts at the end. He starts washing feet. And I see them sort of look at each other like, what's happening here? He's the master. What's he doing? And we got to Peter. You remember Peter, right? Foot-shaped mouth. He's always saying something. Sometimes the right thing, sometimes the wrong thing. But this time he said, you're not washing my feet, Lord. And Jesus said to him, if I don't wash your feet, then you have no part with me. You can leave. And Peter said, well, don't just wash my feet. Wash my hands and my head too. You know, once he came around, he came all the way around, right? He said, I want to be all in, Lord. And then Jesus got to the end of the row, washed everybody's feet. I guess he maybe stood up and stretched his back a little bit after stooping that long. Maybe he dried his hands on that towel. And he said, do you understand what I did? Well, yeah, you washed our feet. No. Do you understand what this means? If I, the master, have washed your feet, then you should wash each other's feet. If I'm not too good to do it, you're not too good to do it. I've got a friend that preaches it's in Mississippi, I'll just tell you. Where I'm not from, by the way. Right. Although I did preach there 5 years, so not in this church, but in that state. Anyway, I got a friend that preaches in Mississippi. That congregation, I know of no church like it. It is bursting at the seams. They baptize so many, they don't even know how many they've baptized. They don't keep up with it. It is absolutely incredible. I talked to the preacher this week since I've been here, and he said, Alan, you won't believe. You wouldn't believe it unless you saw it. He said, it's a block party in our party an hour and a half after every service. People are staying and just talking, and they're bringing their friends. We've got studies going on. They probably have a dozen Bible studies every day. It's incredible. Incredible. They are the only church in that region of the state that can qualify someone to receive government aid for being homeless. So they require a Bible study before they'll do that. So they got members all through the building studying with people all day. And they quit. I could talk about this congregation for hours, but what I'm going to tell you here is they learned that if you want to reach people, you got to serve people. The preacher was a machinist. He's not even trained to be a preacher. He was a machinist. He worked for the government before. Anyway, it's very successful. But he was asked to come preach this church. He did. Decided to. Moved there. But there right now, he started training after school kids to do machinist work. And so they'd come, And then every time they're there, they have a Bible study. So before long, they're starting to visit the church, and then they're bringing their parents, and then they're baptizing their parents, and now they've got a nationally recognized program. In fact, they received the governor's award for the state of Mississippi for this after-school program. And they've got huge corporations who can't find machinists because people don't want to work. I've heard that 3 times since I've been here by talking to people. It's all over the country. And they only take 12 at a time. And everybody wants them. All these big corporations. He was interviewed on a TV program by the largest supplier in the world. Starts with an M, I don't remember. Seen by millions of people. And he always starts with the church every time. He made that promise to himself. He would always mention the church right off. They had a community board, like a Facebook or something, I don't know. But if you had any needs, you could post on it. And so like a farmer had a 1947 tractor, and he couldn't get parts for it. And he said, I need this. And so he said, well, bring it up here and let me see it. I might can make one. So he brought the part up there that was broken, and his name's Chris. Chris spent all day making that part. And then the guy was sort of old. He said, well, let me put it on for you. So he drove out to the farm, and he rolled up his sleeves, he got down under the tractor, and he put the part on. And the guy said, what I owe you, man? This means everything to me. He said, nothing. The church does this. We just help people. He said, no, you can't work all day and not get paid. I mean, at least let me pay for He said, no. This is what we do. We help people. And he just kept on and on. I'm not going to let you. He said, okay, well, you want to pay me back, come hear me preach Sunday. And he did. Right? That's just an example. It's all over the place. How can we help? There are elders involved. It's just incredible. But what I'm saying is, the lesson is, we got to put the towel on and help people who have needs. Help them so that they will, what Rob Whitaker, you know Rob Whitaker, Rob teaches our house school evangelism classes. He says you got to earn the right to have a Bible study. What that means is, be good to people, be nice to people, be friends to people, and eventually they will be willing to study the Bible with you. But you got to earn the right to have Bible studies. All right, number 3 on our list. So the first one is cast a wide net. Second one is put on the towel. Third one, learn how to sweep. Churches have to learn how to sweep. We're going to talk later today about Luke 15. One of the parables in Luke 15 is about the woman who lost a coin. She had 10 coins, she lost one. You remember how she found it? Yeah, she swept the house. Swept. These are evangelism parables. We'll look at that later. But the principle here is to learn how to sweep as a church. 3 things to sweep. First, you sweep your pews. Almost every church has people in attendance every Sunday that aren't members. Their spouses are members, their children are members. They've just been coming for a while. And sometimes people assume they're members and they're not. Sweep the pews. Talk to the people. I had a friend, I have an elder, it's not really a friend, but he's an acquaintance. In a church that I do meetings in, they have this rotation every 3rd year, right? So they're like 5, 6 preachers, and every 3rd year you go back. So I got to know one of the elders fairly well. And he was one of those guys. I asked my students the other day if they knew the word gregarious. Gregarious. He was a gregarious person. Just bigger than life, right? Just likable. He could say, your dog's ugly, and you'd thank him for it. I mean, everybody liked him. And there was a guy who had been coming with his girlfriend, and they were engaged. And he'd been coming a good while, but he hadn't been baptized. And the guy's name's Jerry. The elder's name's Jerry. I don't know the other guy's name. But he said, and the other guys want to tell me this later because he led singing in the meeting. This is later. But he said, you know what Jerry did? He said he came up and threw his old arm around me one Sunday night and said, when you going to let me baptize you? And he said, I don't know. I've been thinking about it. Well, it was the next week, right? It didn't take long. Every church needs a Jerry. And you wouldn't say this about yourself, but people know it and you know it. Some people just have that personality. That personality is a tool for the kingdom. Some people, they can make you mad just by looking your way. You know, what do you mean by that? Well, you're not the one to do this, right? And sometimes I'm like, well, why don't people like me? No. You know? Well, if you're the kind of person that people just like, I mean, you just have good social skills. Use it for evangelism. Go talk to the husband of the lady that's been coming. You know, you might not go over there and say you want a Bible study right off. Invite them over to your house for supper. Play cards with them. Watch a ball game. Find out what he likes to do and go do that. A round of golf, hunting, whatever it is. Spend some time with him. And eventually you get to the point where, man, we just love having you come. Your wife's one of our best members. Sure would be great if you ever decide you want to be a member. You know, you're just our kind of people, you know. You know, just learn how to talk to people. Sweep the pews. Your teenage class. Maybe your junior high class. Your teacher needs to be aware that that's the age that a lot of young people obey the gospel. So why don't you talk about it, what to do to be a Christian in that class? Sweep the pews. Number 2, sweep the streets. Do the people around the building know about this church, what this church is about, who we are? I was preaching in Kentucky a while back, and the preacher or some member said, come here, I want to introduce you to somebody. So there's a lady back there. They introduced me, and they said, well, we just wanted you to meet her because she's a member here because of House to House, Heart to Heart. And I said, really? And she said, yeah, let me tell you. She said, I live down the road the church building's on. She said, I drove by this building every day to go to work, on the way to work and the way home every day. But I never really noticed it. I didn't really pay any attention. It's just another building. And then I got this in the mail, and I read it, and I said, this is good. What church is this? And they had the picture of the building on the front of it. I know that church. That's right up there, you know. And so she came for a visit. This is a very good church, large church, active. So, of course, they made contact with her, and next thing you know, they taught her, and she was a member there. This was like 2 years later when I met her. She's been a member for a couple of years. That's what we want to do, is put a face on the building. We want the people on the street to know who we are. So sweep the streets. That door knocking day we talked about, that's one way to do it. You can do it other days, other ways. You can do, there's a church somewhere. They go down to the MARTA, it was some city. They go down to the MARTA, or what do they call the subway in different places. In Atlanta, it's the MARTA. I think in Washington, maybe it's something else. But anyway, and that's where they pass out stuff. Because they say you can't go door to door in our neighborhood. But you can go to the MARTA. And people are going to be sitting on the train. They'll open up and read it because they got nothing else to do till they get there, right? So that's what they do. Sometimes people get phone numbers and just call people. Now, you might not want to do that. Some people, because of, the way it is, that might not be the right way, but churches have used that before. And once they find out you're not a telemarketer, it gets a lot easier. It's like, we're from the church just down the street, and okay, well, that's a little different. So, so you need a net to cast You need a towel to wear. You need a broom to sweep. The third one on sweeping is the homes. This one really probably will be between those two, but it really doesn't matter. So you've got a member of the church here. Let's just say it's a sister, and she's got a family, but you haven't met the family because they don't. Her husband never comes. Her children haven't been. Sweep those homes. Somebody that's living with a Christian is a good prospect because you can't help but learn something when you live with a Christian. And they can't help but see the change that's come over her life, or if the genders are different, his life, so that that's softening the soul. 1 Peter 3, 1-7. If you can't win them with the word, which what that means, the last part of that says, speaking of the wives, without the word, that doesn't mean you're going to somehow convert them without the Bible. What that means is the wife's word. Don't keep nagging him about going to church with you. What are a lot of men going to do if you just keep nagging? Going to dig a heels in, and that's that. Don't talk to me about it. I'm not listening to you. Well, there'll come up a time later you can talk about it again, but don't make it worse right now. So without the word, just set a good example. You can't argue with a good example, and eventually you're going to have to use words to convert somebody. Eventually, you have to use words. And I'll say this as I just said that word example. What I hear in churches a good bit is, well, I don't really do any Bible studies, but I try to set a good example for everybody. It's not enough. It's not enough. You don't save people with a good example. You don't. Now, you got to have a good example before you can be a good teacher. Nobody wants to eat out of a dirty plate, right? Nobody wants to receive the gospel from somebody who's not living it. But just being a good example, people will watch you and they will go to the judgment day unprepared. You got to use words. You got to set up the Bible study. You can't do it with just a good example. And that's why evangelism is failing in many congregations, is that's our plan. They got two plans. This is dumb. This is so dumb, but I'm hearing it. I didn't hear it here. But one is, evangelism plan is people moving in. We're a military town, or we've got this big business, or we're a growing area. We're going to grow because this area is growing. That's not growth. That's swapping. They left another church to come to yours. That didn't grow the kingdom a bit. And if you're counting on that, you're going to have as many leave as come most of the time. You're not going to grow. And then the second one is we set a good example. Well, both of those are good. We're glad to have new members move in. That's great. And we're glad to set a good example. But the way to grow a church is set up a Bible study and go teach. Prospects, studies, baptisms, growth. That's how it works. And that's hard, but that's the way it works. That's what it takes to grow a church. You can't just take the easy way. There is no easy way. You grow a church by doing the work. All right, the last one is get out the repair kit. Get out the repair kit. Something wrong with that clock. I'll tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and do this point, and then we will take our break. We'll have our full break, but I will finish this before we break. This is about salvaging. And I'm going back to the last point of that other list I said about the cultural change, the reaching out culturally. There are people that society has thrown away that the church can salvage. Tell you who they are. Drug addicts, ex-cons, the immoral, the uneducated. The world's like, it's just, we dealt with prisoners. Drugs are everywhere. It's terrible. Every church has to deal with it. I'm sure you have. What I learned, though, is that this might only be in Alabama, so I don't want to overspeak. It might only be where I was, but this is what I saw. It's a vicious cycle. Once you get in that, it's all about making money. The government making money. They're just continually sending out the warrants. You got to pay for this. You got to pay for that. You got to pay for this court. You got to pay. Yeah, and people run out of money, and then they're in jail. They're in prison. I'm not saying they don't relapse, and there's not guilt involved. Although, well, I won't say that. So, sometimes I think that you're very vulnerable. If you're an ex-con, you're very vulnerable. Very vulnerable. So you have to be, you're better off to move to another location, another state. You didn't hear that here, but that's the truth. That's the truth. But I tell you this, what the church's role in that is, we love them. The world is done with them. The church isn't. That church I was telling you about, Mississippi, they have converted a lot of homeless people because they're the homeless qualifier, right? And a lot of drug addicts. I reached out to Chris when I was preaching one time, and I said, how many last Sunday were either homeless or formerly homeless in your assembly Sunday? He said, let me get back to you. He said, probably about 20. That makes people uncomfortable. But we got to get comfortable as Christians. A soul is a soul. And on the drug addict part, so he said the problem that we have is that we convert them and they do repent and they do want to do better, but then they fall back into the same friends in the same community and they get sucked back into that. He says, so we have trouble keeping them off drugs. So one of their elders went to Texas. I don't know what place, he didn't say. Somewhere in Texas they had a drug rehab program, a Church of Christ that had a drug rehab program. They had a problem. That they would bring the drug rehab, former drug users in. They'd spend 6 months, whatever it was, in the school. And then they got out, and they wanted to be a member there, and their members were like, I don't know about that. They were standoffish. They were wrong in that. That's wrong. But the elder went out there and talked to them, and they worked out a deal. They said, our problem is we need to get our guys out of here because they're falling back into it. We want to send them to your program and for them to live out here, or at least to go through your program for 6 months. And when your guys graduate, you send them to us because we welcome. I mean, our church is used to that, you know, so we would love to have them. So they worked out that deal. I think about John 8, 1 through 11, where the woman taken in adultery is brought to Jesus, and they were ready to kill her. That's why they brought her. That was a capital offense. They brought their rocks, I guess. They were going to stone her. You remember how Jesus handled that? He stooped down and wrote on the ground. And I see them sort of look at each other like, what's he doing? He's ignoring us. And then the verb tense said they kept on asking him. Like, aren't you going to answer us? What do you want to do with it? You know. Finally, he stood up. And he said, he that's without sin, let him cast the first stone. And then he stooped down and wrote on the ground again. Whew. That took the air out of the room. It's like, so the oldest one, the rod guy, the oldest one there. Now, you've heard of the bully pulpit, right? Yeah. This is what it means, yeah. And I feel like this chair is going to go on me, so if I fall out on the floor, you can laugh. It'll be fine. It would be no less than I deserve, would it? So he wrote on the ground. The oldest one left. And I see him saying maybe, as he left, throws down his rock. But I'm out of here, guys. I got some stuff I'm doing today. And then the next one, yeah, me too. And another one, yeah, I don't have time for this. So all of them leave till the youngest, hot-bloodedest one of all, the Dave of them. Yeah. And he's, forget it. Throws his rock down, leaves too. And it's just the woman, Jesus, and the crowd that's there. Where are thine accusers? No man, Lord. She was supposed to be dead. They brought the rocks to kill her. But Jesus salvaged her. You know what he said to her? He didn't say you're okay the way you are. Now, the law that Jesus lived under said, in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, let every word be established, which meant you couldn't be executed on one person's condemnation or testimony. So how many are there to witness against her? They all left, right? So Jesus isn't being soft on sin. He's not even the one to make that decision. That's a civil matter. He's not a civil judge. But they brought her to him to try to accuse him. But Jesus wasn't soft on sin, but he was big on grace. And he said, go thy way and sin no more. He gave her a second chance on life. And I'll tell you, I'm looking into the faces of people that need a second chance on life. Not the same sin, but sin. And somebody salvaged us. And now we can salvage somebody else. One more story and we're done. We'll take our break. But I was preaching in a church. I won't tell you where, but I was noticing that they had a lot of people that were not usual church kind of people. Like one guy said, I'm going to miss tomorrow night, preacher. I got my parole meeting. And then another guy, I got my AA meeting. And a lot of stuff like that. Guys that have been in prison, stuff like that. And so I know the preacher well. He's moved to another state, and I preached where he is now. And he's this kind of guy there too. But I said, his name's Terry. I said, Terry, what's with this parole meeting thing? And all? He said, oh yeah. He said, well, what we've learned is that publicans make good contacts. I said, publicans. He said, yeah. So the Jews hated the publicans, right? Publicans and sinners. But they came to Jesus gladly. And the people that are like that in our community, we notice them. We talk to them. We study with them. We invite them. We welcome them. And we've learned that a lot of our baptisms come out of publicans. That stuck with me. He did tell me, and this is true, and you just need to know this going in, that there's a proverb that says, where no oxen are, the crib is clean, but much produce comes by the strength of the ox. Pretty close to that. What that means is, if you got an ox, you got a mess. Right? But if you don't have an ox, you don't have a harvest. If you are an evangelistic church, you're going to have some messes. Just the way it is. You got some relapses. You're going to have some people that are struggling with sin. You got people, what do? Love them and help them. That's also a very transient part of your community. And some of those people will move on, move away. And that's okay. You just try to help them relocate to the church, wherever they go. All right, we'll take our break. So we'll take a 10-minute break, come back maybe 10.